Thanks very much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Good to be here.
We have, for the first time in almost 30 years, a Hoosier back in the White House as VP, Mike Pence. The last Hoosier to serve in that role was Dan Quayle. You were his chief of staff.
Right.
I guess, from your perspective, can you tell us what sorts of things former Governor Pence, now VP Pence, is walking into? What is this job going to be like for him?
I think every vice president has a different job depending on what the president wants him to do and what his background and skills are. Dan Quayle, I think, played a good role in the Bush White House, but you had George H.W. Bush, who'd been around a long time, and Jim Baker, who was a seasoned pro of Washington, Dick Cheney, Secretary of Defense. He was the young guy in the White House, Quayle was. He was a former senator, which the others weren't, so he did a lot of work with the Senate, a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. Pence, I think, could have a much more visible and probably more central role. The Trump White House has almost no one who has served in the federal government. They have, I think, literally no one at the very senior level who served in the White House or in the executive branch. But the person who knows the most about how Washington works in the Trump White House is Mike Pence. If you imagine the Trump, cabinet meeting or the Trump Oval Office meeting, and they're good, they're a mixture of people, some of them are good, some of them not so good, whatever. But the one thing they all have in common, no government experience, except for Mike Pence and Mike Pence's team. So Pence, and you know what? You need to pass legislation if you want to be a successful president. If you want to change America, you can do some stuff with executive orders, you can do some stuff with the bully pulpit, but basically you need to get legislation passed through Congress. Who has served in Congress and in a leadership role in Congress? Mike Pence. So I think Pence could be quite important to the success or failure of the Trump administration.
Sure. Piggybacking off of that, here in Indiana, there's been a fair amount of talk of just that's good to have a Hoosier in the White House, and certainly it probably is. But B, I guess from your perspective, how much sway, what can the VP really do for his state or any particular state?
Yeah, not that much, because there are rules and regulations, and he can't, detour federal funds here. They have to go through certain processes. It's funny, when you come to Indiana, people are, of course, Pence was governor here the last 4 years. He's been a figure in Indiana politics for so long. People liked him, they didn't like him, whatever, but it's a big deal that he's from Indiana. I'd say in Washington, the way in which Pence is a big deal is he was a member of the House for 12 years and in the leadership the last several years, an influential member of the House. That's kind of the comparative advantage he brings to the Trump administration. So from a Washington point of view, it's more a Mike Pence, House member, guy who knows Paul Ryan, guy who knows the committee chairman, guy who knows how complicated it is to pass a tax bill. That's really the key side of Mike Pence that people are focused on in Washington, less the fact that he was governor here or is a Hoosier. He talks about Hoosiers a lot, though.
Sure.
More people will know what a Hoosier is by the end of the Pence vice presidency.
Officially now, Hoosiers are not Indianans, thanks to a bill.
I saw that somewhere. Is that right? That was a big Senator Donnelly thing. Yeah. Pence will become even maybe more famous than Bobby Knight is in Indy as a Hoosier,
You talked today about the importance of civil society and I think on a related note, civil discourse. And I was talking to some of the folks before your speech, and the thing that they echoed repeatedly was how troubled they are by what they see as the breakdown of civil discourse. You talked to a lot of people who disagree with you, people who agree with you. Politico did a profile on you last year during the conventions about how you were, they don't get to use this word, but sort of unflappable. It didn't let criticism get to you. I'm wondering if maybe you can offer some perspective on how we get back to that place.
Look, one reason I didn't much like and don't much like Donald Trump is I do think he's reckless in the way he speaks, and that does corrupt the public discourse, coarsen it, cheapen it somewhat, and that's not a good thing. But we shouldn't overreact either. We still live in a very free and vigorous country. People have arguments, and then they go out and have a drink. People live next door to people they disagree with. They don't get into fights or shoot each other, thank God, 99.999% of the time. We don't have mass violence in the streets. We have huge marches. The Women's March in Washington was a very big thing, totally peaceful. We have people with very strong views on different issues, almost always totally peaceful. People get along with neighbors with whom they disagree. So I think one could exaggerate, if you look at the TV news and you look at especially at Washington, You can exaggerate the problem. There is a problem, but you can exaggerate it. And that's one reason I think getting power back to localities, decentralizing, getting authority back to communities helps a lot. People do work together in cities and in counties and in towns. And they have to work together, and they learn to work together and to work across whatever divisions they have. If you just are voting once every 4 years, and otherwise you're screaming at the TV and berating people you don't agree with, and only watching TV shows you agree with, and reading things you agree with, that does lead to a populace that's more angry, more cut off from each other. If people have to get together and resolve local issues, many of which are not very ideological, then they get used to working with people who aren't like them, who are a different generation, maybe a different color, a different religion, different political views. That really is the argument for decentralization and localization of authority.
Sure. Jumping off that, there's been a lot of attention paid recently about who gets to go on TV and share their views. Of course, CNN was heavily criticized, I think. At one point had both Corey Lewandowski and Donna Brazile on the payroll. Lewandowski was still being paid by the Trump campaign, and Donna Brazile, of course, is a longtime member of the Democratic National Party. You go on TV a lot too. I guess, A, is there a value to the viewer for having sort of unrepentant, unabashed party flacks come on and just talk past each other? And if you could remake political news television, what would you do?
And I'd say when I used to do this, when I first did the Sunday shows, both on ABC and then Fox News Sunday, there was a rule that the people on those panels were journalists or magazine editors or commentators of some kind. They weren't elected officials, and they didn't work for one of the parties or for elected officials. There's been more muddying of the waters or mixing up of people in the last several years. I'm not necessarily a terrible thing. Sometimes it's interesting to have a conversation with a congressman and someone who's on the Democratic National Committee and someone who's a journalist. But I think in those cases you do want to identify people and let the viewer know this person really isn't simply saying what he or she believes. He or she's constrained by elective office or by, when people see the representative or the senator, they kind of know right away, oh, this isn't quite someone just giving his opinion. This is someone thinking about what he's saying because he's got voters. And the same is true, obviously, of someone who's on the Democratic committee or works for a campaign or is paid by a particular interest group. So I'm in favor of disclosure. And I guess personally, I find it more interesting. I have no problem with actually a Clinton person and a Trump person arguing with each other. You can learn a lot from that by seeing what arguments they use and how they answer to each other. But I think it is probably healthier to have a Clinton person or a Trump person back in the campaign, or a Democrat and a Republican now, from the Hill, and then have a separate discussion with 2 or 3 commentators, conservative, liberal, moderate, whatever, who don't have sort of a stake in it, who don't have to be careful what they say, who can say, look, I don't know, Mitch McConnell, I probably agree with him on 80-90% of the issues. I hope he's a successful majority leader of the Senate, but a couple of weeks ago I said I thought he was foolish when he shut down Elizabeth Warren. I don't work for Mitch McConnell. I can say that. But if you have Mitch McConnell's spokesman on, he's not going to say that.
Sure. Let me pivot a little bit. You were introduced today. One of the superlatives in your introduction today was you identified one of the key public intellectuals of our era. During the Surrealist movement, they had Andre Breton, who would decide what Surrealism was, who was a Surrealist. For conservatism, for a long time, it was folks like William Buckley. Do you think that role still exists in conservatism? Should it?
I don't think it really exists. I'm not sure it ever existed as much as people now say. Buckley tried to do it, but he had to make the argument, and he had to say, look, the Birchers are wrong. And it wasn't just that he couldn't just snap his fingers and expel people from a movement. And no, I think, look, it's a free country, and I'm always for erring on the side of let people speak, let people make up their own minds about who they like. I myself wouldn't participate in some conferences where certain people might speak. I don't want to be on a panel, a platform with an anti-Semite or a bigot of some kind. So that's a separate issue. But I'm pretty libertarian in a way on this. And I think on the whole it's a healthy thing that you can't just snap your fingers and kick people out of movements, and that there's a little more diversity and people can show up from nowhere and become well-known, even if they don't have credentials, as they say. I mean, a lot of the health of America is that it's an open system and a bottom-up system. So we pay some price for that sometimes, a little bit of wackiness, but I think on the whole it's a good thing.
Well,
One
last
more.
question, sure. And this is the last question I have. Following up on that, the idea that you have to make your argument, right? This year, maybe for the first time ever, the National Review came out against the Republican candidate. You came out against the Republican candidate. I think George Will came out against the Republican
Right.
candidate. And just about every newspaper in the country, in fact, came out against the Republican candidate. And he nevertheless prevailed. What role do you see right now for the conservative intellectual in the current ecosystem?
Well, first of all, people should say what they believe. I mean, they shouldn't like try to find a role, and we have differences among ourselves, a lot of conservative policy types and commentators and intellectuals. I think you've got to call it as you see it. I think you can't think of yourself as a team player. And I would say particularly if you're a conservative or Republican, Trump will do some things that you'll applaud, nomination of Judge Gorsuch, and you should applaud them, and someone like me, I'll make arguments for why he should be confirmed. But he'll also do some things that you probably won't like, and I think it's very important to say that. You can't just tell yourself, well, gee, he's on my team, so I'm just going to support everything blindly. Because then you end up, I mean, the great advantage one has if one is an independent person, an intellectual who's not part of the team, not paid by the team, your future doesn't depend, hopefully, on whether the president likes you or not, is you could hopefully steer things in a better direction. You know, you can correct and check the bad things Trump may try to do, the foolish things he may try to do, and support the good things. So I think actually it's an exciting time for conservatives and Republicans. It's an exciting time for liberals too to rethink after the surprising loss of Hillary Clinton. The good news is it is a very volatile, fluid, unusual moment. The bad news is those moments can be dangerous because things can go off the rails. But we have a president who's a little bit different from a typical president, much less cautious and more reckless, I would say. No, but I think it's very important to call it as you see it.